Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar in the Jerusalem Press Club series on Israel's upcoming elections. I'm Eli Klutstein, Press Coordinator at JPC. Our guest today is Dr. Khalil Shikaki, Director of the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research in Ramallah. Dr. Shikaki will elaborate on the Palestinian view of the Israeli elections, and in addition, he will also brief us on the findings of his latest survey and will also expand on the current dynamics between Israelis and the Palestinians. Since 1993, Dr. Shikaki has conducted more than 200 polls among Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and since 2000 conducted dozens of joint polls among Palestinians and Israelis. He has taught at several Palestinian and American universities, and between 1996 to 1999 was the Dean of Scientific Research at the El-Najaf University in Nablus. Welcome, Dr. Shikaki.
Thank you, Eli.
Let's start with a basic question, even before your introduction. Do the Palestinians even care about the Israeli elections? Does it make any difference, in your view, who will be the next prime minister?
They do, but they don't think that it will make much of a difference. The expectations is that Israel has been and will continue to be moving towards the right-wing politics, and that even if it is not exactly all right-wing, if this is a coalition of right-wing, center, and left, it will still maintain the status quo rather than move in any other way. So, since this is the expectation, most Palestinians don't expect to see the elections making any difference with regard to their lives or with regard to Israeli-Palestinian relations. Now, they do expect Netanyahu to win as well. Well, not the majority, but the largest percentage does expect Netanyahu to win. So this is probably one additional contribution. And since you started with this, although I will be talking more about this later, there is a certain percentage of Palestinians, not a lot, but I would say probably a fifth to a quarter of the Palestinians who do see the current prime minister, Lapid, as being somewhat different than Netanyahu, based on we've asked in this survey about the support for negotiations with the current Israeli prime minister, and we, to our surprise, we did find a lot more than we expected in terms of support for such negotiations, whether there are negotiations for a permanent solution to the conflict, such as a peace agreement, or confidence-building measures. It is this confidence-building measures in particular that I think the Palestinians link to Lapid and to the current government, and of course to Bennett as well, since this is something that started when Bennett was the prime minister. And confidence-building measures seems to be something that most Palestinians, in fact, in this survey, almost the vast majority, looks at positively, which is a surprise because in general, we have seen in the past people considering these small measures as crumbs that do not make much of a difference in the lives of the Palestinians. But this survey, the current survey, actually shows almost 70% of the public thinking that, or indicating that they view these measures positively. So this is something that they are associating with Lapid, and we do see the support for Lapid. So in terms of the Israeli elections, it seems to me, even though they expect Netanyahu to win, that at least a segment of the Palestinian public will be watching to see if Lapid might be the next prime minister. They don't expect it, but this will be for them the outcome that remains unknown at this moment.
Great. I think this is very interesting. Maybe just one more question before you start going deeper into your survey. Did the recent speech by Prime Minister Lapid in the United Nations General Assembly, did it change something in the view of the Palestinian public?
the statement by Lapid was not part of the survey, and although this is something that most Palestinians would, if we asked, would probably consider to be positive, for the most part, the Palestinians don't take seriously statements in support of a two-state solution by Israeli leaders. As long as Israeli leaders continue to build settlements for the Palestinians, action speaks much louder than words, and any statement in support of a two-state solution isn't really likely to be taken seriously by the Palestinians if it is not accompanied by certain steps on the ground that essentially affirm the commitment to a two-state solution.
Okay, great. So maybe you can start now with your survey, and we will have more follow-up questions later.
Thank you, Eli. This survey was conducted last month, in the third week of last month in September, among 1,270 Palestinians in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and of course, including East Jerusalem. And the margin of error is 3%. We have essentially focused my presentation that I will be presenting now in the next 10 minutes or so, essentially divides the issues that we looked at into two. I'll start with the domestic scene and how attitudes have changed in recent months. And then I'll move to the Israeli-Palestinian issues and look at the changes that we have seen during the last few months as well. The recent heightening of tension that we have seen in Jenin, of course, was ongoing at that time, but there has been further escalation in the last 2-3 weeks that are not obviously covered in the survey, and that might therefore question some of the findings if we are to do another survey right now on this issue of the heightened tension between Palestinians and Israelis. Attitudes might be different. So let us start with the first thing that I am interested in showing you in terms of change, and I am presenting it, what you're looking at right now, is related to support for the various factions. And it shows basically the last 2 years so that you can see the most recent finding in context, given what happened 2 years ago. We start where we see significant change in the past couple of years is when we decided to go to elections. This would be March of 21. And then when we went to war with Israel, Hamas went to war with Israel, and so the findings in June 21 show the results and how it impacted on the domestic balance of power. And then we can see how that too began to change later on. For example, when Israel and when Abbas and Gantz started confidence building measures, and some measures were agreed to, we could see the rise in support for Fatah at that time. So the essential point here is that good governance, democracy, going to elections essentially proved to be highly useful for Fatah, increasing its support and decreasing the support for Hamas. War with Israel did the exact opposite. Confidence building measures did help Fatah somewhat, but not as much as the elections did. But certainly this issue is one issue that it seems it would be useful for us to continue to monitor. Heightened tension between Israel and the Palestinians, between Israel and Hamas in particular, will continue to benefit Hamas. Any negotiations, any confidence building measures, any positive steps in Israeli-Palestinian relations will help, obviously, Fatah. Similarly, good governance on the part of Fatah seems to be highly effective in generating a lot of support. Now, the next slide that we will look at shows the demand for Abbas resignation. Again, I'm showing the trend right now, as you can see, also for the last 2 years. And we can see clearly that there has been a rise during the last 2 years in the demand for Abbas's resignation. It had, in the last survey in September, it had declined somewhat. And in part, I think the reason for this decline in the demand for resignation, as well as the next slides that we will see soon, indicate essentially some sympathy for Abbas after he came under attack during his visit to Germany by Germany and by Israel and the US for his Holocaust, for the use of the term Holocaust when referring to what Abbas said in Arabic. He said massacres. In English, he used the word Holocaust. And that for the Palestinians, since they heard massacres, obviously they were not surprised when we asked, but he also in English used the word Holocaust. We found that people, a significant number, not an overwhelming majority, but significant majority, showed understanding, and the opposition for comparing massacres to the Holocaust there was a large minority opposing, but clearly most Palestinians don't see a problem with Abbas using that term, and that helped Abbas gain some support. The slide you're currently looking at shows that nonetheless, and this slide is also comparing the last 2 years. Abbas has improved somewhat in the last survey compared to Haniya. But Haniya wins. Haniya is red in the two slides you're looking at. Haniya is red, and to the right, he is Haniya. Haniya is Hamas's most popular leader. He wins support not only from, in general, but in particular, if he is competing against Abbas, he wins support from people who do not share Hamas's values. They like him. They think he's moderate. They think he's a unifier. And so in general, he has a positive perception. Nonetheless, if you now look to the left, you see Marwan Barghouthi competing with Haniya. And again, Haniya now is also in red, and he's way below Barghouthi. In general, the level of support for Islamism is the base for support for Hamas. And the level of the percentage of those who share this value in the society is about 1/3 of the Palestinian society. Hamas essentially receives support from all of those. Every time Hamas goes beyond 1/3 in terms of the support, it means it is getting support from secular nationalists, not Islamists. This is the case with Abbas when running against Haniya. He loses a lot of secular nationalists voting for Haniya, but not the case for Barghouthi, Marwan Barghouthi. Marwan Barghouthi, as you know, is in an Israeli jail. He is seen as a national hero by the Palestinians, but as a terrorist by the Israelis. And but if secular nationalists want somebody to beat Haniya, he is their most effective weapon against Haniya, because essentially every secular nationalist participating in the elections vote for Barghouthi, and every Islamist vote for Ismail Haniya. Now, if we go to the next slide, it shows what we are finding. Now, this is not a trend. This is a question about current reality today, a snapshot of attitudes regarding the most pressing problem. And the reason I'm showing it is to show you the major differences that we are currently witnessing. This is something that evolved some years ago, but this survey clearly shows while both sides agree that occupation is almost equally, that occupation is the most pressing problem confronting Palestinians. On the other four problems, that we have each side, West Bank versus Gaza, take very different view. Gaza unemployment is the problem number 2, while it is corruption. The split between the West Bank and Gaza is Hamas's, actually Hamas's number 2, and or no, sorry, Gaza's number 2. Unemployment being number 3, and the reason is that, and while West Bankers just hardly think it is a pressing problem. The reason, of course, is that it is Gaza that pays the price of the split, not the West Bank, and so it is not as pressing for West Bankers. Internal, the fear of internal violence is much greater in the West Bank than it is in Gaza. And obviously, the developments such as the attempted assassination against Dr. Nasruddin Shah from An-Najah University, who some of you might know was the deputy prime minister in the first Hamas government back in 2006. So that's certainly the fear that there would be internal turmoil and violence is something that we asked about in this survey, and clearly West Bankers are much more worried in this slide as well as in the other findings about this development. Our next slide looks at West Bank and Gaza being concerned about major issues. And these are essentially 3 issues that the Palestinian that are important, particularly for the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, that should raise a lot of alarm for the Palestinian Authority. One is about people not trusting the Palestinian Authority. You can then, and this is about the narrative that or the statements made by the Palestinian Authority about the transfer of monthly payments of salaries of Palestinians working, laborers working in Israel, to Palestinian banks. The overwhelming majority of the Palestinians are opposed to that. Why? Well, because they are afraid that the Palestinian Authority will tax these incomes beyond the taxes that are currently paid. The laborers in particular are extremely worried about it. So we asked the public, do you trust the statements made by the Palestinian Authority? Only 12% said yes. So 12% believe the Palestinian Authority, 85% do not. That is a major problem for the Palestinian Authority. We also find that there is a great deal of concern, particularly in the West Bank, about armed conflict, internal armed strife. That is also clearly something the PA should worry about. We also find that the plans for the Palestinian Authority to address the concerns, the financial constraints that it currently has by reducing the public sector, is something that the vast majority of the Palestinian public is not in favor. So these are 3 essentially policy measures. The one about the attempted assassination is not a policy measure per se, but the failure of the Palestinian Authority to arrest anybody in connection with this and put them on trial is something that is a matter of policy. And for most Palestinians, the concern is that the Palestinian Authority might itself be involved, or somebody within the security services might be involved in the attempted assassination. Okay, now we will move to the Israeli-Palestinian issues. And here I start with the support for the 2-state solution and the 1-state solution, again, looking at trends and then comparing these trends with the latest findings. The latest findings now show that support for the 2-state solution has gone down below the average for 2020. This is also true for the average in 2021, which is not indicated here, but it was closer to the one in 2020. We don't have a majority. We did not have a majority for a long time already, but certainly now we have a little over 1/3 of the public who still continue to support it. Most importantly, however, there was a time when the support for the 1-state solution, this is a 1-state solution with equal rights, one democratic state for Israeli Jews and Palestinians living between the river and the sea. The support that climbed significantly in 2020 is no longer climbing to this level. We now have less than a third who support it. Most of the support, by the way, for the one-state solution comes from young Palestinians between the ages of 18 and 29. The support there is in fact higher than the support for the two-state solution among this age group. The next slide shows us the differences, the choices made in the most recent survey. This is also a trend question, as you can see. We ask people about the most effective means of ending the Israeli occupation. They can say negotiations, they can say non-violence, or they can say violence or armed struggle. And as you can see, today, actually, this September survey shows significant decline in support for violence and an increase in support for diplomacy. For the first time, a significant decline for the first time since the war between Hamas and Israel last May. This is an important development. Now, we interpret the decline. I mentioned earlier that there is significant tension these days, and that perhaps even this slide might no longer be the snapshot of today. And that is because there is a great deal of violence, and normally when there is a great deal of violence, we do see an increase in the level of support for violence. Similarly, of course, when there is a great deal of demand for violence, we see people willing to meet the demand and supply the violence. In this case, actually the opposite happened. This is our interpretation for why there is a decline in the current survey. We think, and we did ask in this last survey in September about the confrontation between Islamic Jihad and Israel. We normally ask who came out a winner. In this case, there were more people who said Israel came out a winner rather than Islamic Jihad. Normally, people don't do that. They don't associate Israel with winning against the Palestinians, but they did by more than 100% more said that Israel came out a winner. The largest percentage, however, said neither side came a winner. Only 12% said Islamic Jihad came out a winner. This is an example of a major armed confrontation that actually might have contributed to a decline in support for armed struggle. This is one of the rare occasions where we see violence not leading to greater demand of violence, but to less demand for violence. What helped, however, I think, was the fact that Hamas did not participate. Hamas staying out of this conflict might have contributed to this outcome. The support, particularly in Gaza, for Hamas's position of staying out was very, very high. Almost 2/3 of Gazans supported Hamas's position. The support in the West Bank was less than that. West Bankers wanted Hamas to take part and join the conflict. Gazans did not want that. The next slide shows us the question about negotiations that we've asked in two ways. One, about support for negotiations with Israel, if there is an Arab or international sponsorship. We don't have a majority, but we do have a very large minority that is in favor of negotiations with Israel. We asked about negotiations with Israel, direct bilateral negotiations, and the support was just about 1/3. When it was in the context of Arab and international sponsorship, the support increased to the level that we are looking at right now. And the next slide shows what happens when we ask specifically about Lapid. Remember, I mentioned that earlier in the context of the Israeli elections when I was answering your question about that. We can see here that only a minority is opposed to any negotiations with Israel. So this is a significant change in attitudes when Lapid is mentioned in two contexts here. We are mentioning Lapid in the context of permanent agreement and in the context of confidence building measures. The support is essentially the same in both cases. If you take them separately, you essentially have, you don't have a majority, but you have about 44% or so who are in favor of a permanent negotiations, a permanent status negotiations, or a confidence building measures. In both cases, I would say this is a significant increase compared to where attitudes were so far. The next slide shows another question that is relevant to the recent developments just before we did the survey, which was the support from the United Arab Emirates to East Jerusalemites. As you might recall, the United Arab Emirates provided some 25 million, or promised to provide some $25 million to Al-Maqasid Hospital in East Jerusalem. We asked the public whether this support to the Palestinians from normalizing countries. Now, for the support from the United Arab Emirates, the answer was this is good for the steadfastness. So what you see in yellow, in blue, is the percentage of those who said this was good for steadfastness of the Palestinians. Now, you'd expect those, when asked, do you welcome the support, for those who said it is good for steadfastness, to say, yes, we support it. That isn't the case, surprisingly not the case. The reason for that is why, in the first question, we just said the United Arab Emirates. And in the second question, we said we're now asking about the countries that have recently normalized relations with Israel. By bringing in this issue of countries that have recently normalized relations with Israel, attitudes changed. So there seems to be a psychological issue here. People are finding it difficult to say, yes, they support this aid coming from countries that have normalized recently. But when the word normalized was not used in the question, and we specifically asked about the United Arab Emirates, of course, people know the United Arab Emirates has been the leader of the normalization process. Attitudes were a lot more positive. I would say, compared to our findings, when this issue of normalization came up first, some 2 years ago, the current slide we're looking at does indicate a huge transformation in attitudes regarding the question of normalization from Arab countries. The anger, the perception of abandonment and betrayal that we saw some 2 years ago might still be there, but it's the significance of that and its implications to Arab and Palestinian relations might be moving in a direction that seems to be more towards reconciliation with these countries rather than a confrontation. And I think this is our last slide, so thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentation. I think we have some time for some questions now. I think the first one might be, you talked about the more maybe positive view of Palestinians regarding Prime Minister Lapid and negotiations with him. And the first thing coming to mind is the participation of an Arab party in the current government of Ram. So how do you Palestinians actually see the participation of this party in the Israeli government? And how do you view also the recent split the Arab parties in Israel had?
The current survey that you just described did not ask specifically about that, but we did ask in the past. So I can speculate about attitudes today. I don't think they are different than where they were some 6 months ago or so when we first asked about it, we found the Palestinian public divided. We expected to see a very strong opposition, to be honest, that an Arab party would be joining with the right, center, and left forces in Israel. And to our surprise, there was a significant split, almost equal, in the attitudes of the Palestinians regarding this, with some saying that it was okay, that they should be integrated into the Israeli political scene, including the government. It is, of course, possible that if this was a Netanyahu government, attitude of the Palestinians regarding Netanyahu is extremely negative. But that, since they thought there might be a change, and indeed, they, as I mentioned earlier, the meeting between Gantz and Abbas and the beginning of confidence building measures at that time might have created some sense of movement, as little as it was, but still it was positive and might have contributed to the perception that having an Arab party in the government might not be bad after all. So that is my speculation right now. There is a split, and my guess would be that for the future, attitudes regarding this would no longer be based on ideological considerations, but rather based on the expectations about the benefit of doing so for both Israeli Arabs and for the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe last one more question about the specific political issue. It was reported several weeks ago in Israel that the Palestinian Authority is taking some active measures within the Israeli Arab community, within the mutual ties they have links, in order to influence maybe its voting in the elections. Do you think this is true, and maybe for which purpose?
We don't have any evidence. I did see that in the Israeli media, but the Israeli media didn't show any evidence of that. I won't be surprised, however, to see the Palestinian Authority being interested. My guess, this would be a huge guess on my part, but my guess would be that they were pushing for greater integration of Israeli Arab parties into the Israeli political process. That the Palestinian Authority's goal is to help have an Israeli Arab party or more that would be part of the Israeli government, and that would help change the direction of Israeli politics in a more moderate manner towards the Israeli-Palestinian issue. This would be my guess as to what direction this intervention would have been. And as I said, I won't be surprised at all if the PA did do that.
Okay, so moving on to the more Israeli-Palestinian issues. You said before that a third of the Palestinians support a two-state solution, and a third, approximately, supports a one democratic state. What does the remaining segment of Palestinians actually want? And I think maybe we should take into consideration the fact that 40% or more of Palestinians actually support a armed struggle. And we do see that actually now we see a lot more of violent acts. So what are we going to see in the future, and what do this third want?
The support for armed struggle or violence does not necessarily impact the support for the one-state solution or the two-state solution. You will find support for armed struggle among the supporters of whatever vision that you might advocate. Actually, there are three visions. I'll describe them in a minute. But I would say this is a development that started, I would say, around 2000, so 22 years ago, when we started to see some of the supporters of the two-state solution showing more and more support for violence. And this was more linked to the perception that diplomacy alone is not going to deliver a two-state solution. So even Hamas, even Fatah supporters who normally are opposed to violence, we started to see support for violence among those, particularly the youth in Fatah. even though they supported more moderate and more compromises in terms of the solution, the permanent solution to the conflict. So the support for armed struggle is no indication of opposition to a two-state solution at all. Now, we have three visions for how to resolve the conflict. There is one that is advocated by Hamas, and right now, approximately 1/4 of the Palestinians support that vision. That is, the entire land between the river and the sea, or historic Palestine, should be one single Arab and Muslim state. Jews can live there, but they do not necessarily have equal rights. This is the vision that is currently supported by about 25% of the Palestinian public. The one that has a slightly higher level of support, about a third of the support, goes to the one-state solution with equal rights. This one-state solution is supported mostly by secular nationalists who are more to the left and who are also young. So that is, right now, it's slightly less than a third, but I would say probably the trend is for 1/3 to maybe slightly even more. And the third, which now is a plurality, has the support of a plurality of the Palestinian public, 37 in the last survey, on average about 40% in recent years, is the two-state solution, two separate independent states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace, security, and cooperation. That is, these are the three visions for how to resolve the conflict. The two-state solution is essentially supported by secular nationalists, particularly from Fatah. So Fatah is the backbone of support, continue to be the backbone of support for this idea of a two-state solution. The one-state solution tends to have more leftist support, but secular nationalists. The one state with that is Muslim and Arab and Palestinian is the one idea that you'll find Hamas being the dominant political force in supporting.
Okay, one reporter is asking, actually, could you expand a bit on why Abbas's Holocaust comments in Berlin seem to have, at least for a brief time, improved his standing among the Palestinians?
Well, someone who basically defends Palestinian rights, even if he uses a term that angers the Israelis or the Americans, is going to find support among the Palestinians. Palestinians heard what he said in Arabic, and he in Arabic said Holocaust. He did not use the word Holocaust. He used the word massacres, but then he used the word Holocaust. For most Palestinians, the sensitivity that Israeli Jews have and many others in the international community have regarding the Holocaust is something that is not as seen as sensitive among Palestinians. Palestinians worry more about their own pain and suffering, their own history, their own Nakba or catastrophe of 1948. They do, for the most part, recognize the Holocaust and sympathize with Jews and realize that the Jewish people have that Europe, not the Palestinians, but that Europe have done a great deal of harm to the Jewish people, but they don't want this to be used as a pretext for justifying the continued Israeli occupation. So there is a little bit of lack of sensitivity, therefore, among the Palestinians regarding the term. And when somebody makes a comparison between Palestinian suffering and the Jewish suffering under the Holocaust, most Palestinians do not think this is inappropriate.
Okay, another reporter is asking about the Palestinian perspective about the growing influence and political power of in Israeli society of right-wing extreme maybe politicians such as Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Well, most Palestinians, of course, would say that this is the real face of Israel. Most Palestinians would say that. That he essentially says publicly what Israel does in reality, that what Israel is doing is creeping annexation And what Israel is doing is denial of the Palestinian national identity by preventing the raising of the flags. What Israel is doing by building settlements is to destroy the future of the two-state solution, etc. So most Palestinians are not going to say, well, this is extreme politics in Israel, but that the rest of the Israelis are not as extreme as this man. They're not going to say that. As I indicated earlier, they do see a difference between Netanyahu and Lapid, and probably will see a difference with this man as well. But the politics, the language seems for the Palestinians to really reflect the Israeli behavior.
Okay, another question is, you talked about the Palestinian view of the UAE support to East Jerusalem, and I think we marked last month 2 years since the Abraham Accords. Israel is cooperating with many Arab states. There are talks that are cooperating on security issues with Saudi Arabia, and even Lebanon is negotiating a maritime agreement with Israel. Are the Palestinians actually left behind? And they do support like negotiations, but do they do any steps or any things to go into the negotiation table? And if they will, what has changed since the last time they've been there?
There is no doubt that the normalization drive that started some 2 years ago is seen by the Palestinians as alarming, and that it indicates that the Arab world no longer considers the Palestinian issue as central, and that Arab countries have their own interests and will pursue those interests regardless of what happened with Israeli-Palestinian relations. And this realization is not new, however. Perhaps the magnitude is much higher than we have in the past, but the trend overall has been for Palestinians to really think that since the Arab Spring in particular, that the Arabs are now consumed with their own problems, and that they don't really have time for the Palestinians, and that they will not put the Palestinian issue on top of their priorities, and that they will pursue their own national interests, even if it is at the expense of the Palestinians. So there is no doubt that this is a main realization that we see, and that the normalization efforts by some Arab countries is certainly taking place in this context. The question is whether the Palestinians think this is the end of the story, or whether they think there might be any opportunity. And so the issue about the United Arab Emirates providing support for the hospital in East Jerusalem, and the possibility that other Arab countries, normalizing countries, would do the same, seems to be receiving some positive hearing here in the current survey, indicating that the Palestinians perhaps are no longer as angry as they were 2 years ago about this. But it also means that when we take this in the context of not attitudes, but behavior, look at what's happening in the last 2 years. Young kids, 15 to 25 years of age, are arming themselves, building, basically crossing over all the factional divides from Fatah, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas, willing to work together to confront the Israeli army, taking matters into their own hands, not waiting for the Palestinian Authority to defend their homes and villages and refugee camps. This seems to be another response from the Palestinians to this normalization efforts, and to the lack of progress on the Israeli-Palestinian file, the lack of hope for a better future, one that can be negotiated, seeing no political horizon whatsoever in the future. It seems to me what we see among the 15 to 25 today, in terms of their own actual behavior and willingness to die and to confront the Israeli army, this is a development that I think is also linked to the normalization process that started 2 years ago.
Okay, this is very interesting, and our time is up, I'm afraid. I wish we had more time to continue talking about these very interesting and important issues. Thank you, Dr. Khalil Shikaki, on your time. We thank you very much for taking from your time to join us here today. And we wish you all a happy new year and Gma Khatima Tova.
Thank you, Eli. Wish you a happy year too. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.